What would Jaylen Wright bring to the Philadelphia Eagles offense? In short, that would be elite speed, acceleration, and the ability to flip the field in the blink of an eye. If a defender takes a bad angle or steps in the wrong direction, it very well could be game over for the defense. And even if a defender takes a good angle, Wright's speed allows him to break those angles. At the time of this video being produced, I don't have his official 40-yard dash measurements, but Wright was also a standout in track, running a 10.58 100-meter dash in high school. I would be very surprised if he doesn't run a 4.3 40 at the combine. That game-breaking speed shows up all over his tape, and it's what his game is based around. He is only one of two running backs in the history of the University of Tennessee to have multiple rushes of longer than 80 yards in his career, and he is only one of 6 players in the FBS to have multiple runs of 70+ yards in 2023. Wright has a Tesla-like ability to go from 0 to 60. When he identifies and bursts through a hole, you'll often see linebackers and safeties diving to try to get a piece of him as they're too late to close the space as he zooms by. When the defense is gap sound and gives Wright little space to run up the middle, his quick feet and instant acceleration lets him capture an edge and outrace defenders around the corner. Now, I felt the need to introduce Jaylen's speed first because that's what sets him apart. But there's more to his game than just that. So let's take a step back and look at his game from snap to finish. As a runner, he's very patient approaching the line of scrimmage. On inside zone runs, he does a good job to press the heels of the offensive line in order to give his blockers time to work through their combos and force defenders to step up and commit to a gap. This play against Florida is a great example. Here we see Tennessee running inside zone weak, and as Wright takes the ball, the nose tackle has a dominant position on the center. He has a lower pad level, inside hand placement, and has locked out the center. If Wright decides to immediately accelerate into the open A gap on the backside, the nose tackle is going to be able to easily shed the block and get the majority of his body into the gap. Also look at the linebacker and guard relationship. If Wright were to accelerate into the gap immediately, the backer has easy access to fill downhill as well. And finally, look at the backside corner. The backside guard will try to combo up to him, but he has to secure the first level before working up to him. Again, if Wright were to immediately accelerate downhill, that corner can fold in right away as well. But he decides to slow his tempo and continue pressing his landmark. I don't know Tennessee's rules, but I imagine his initial landmark is the play side leg of the center. He hops into a split base so that he can load up his legs to burst either direction, and as he does that, he forces the nose tackle to declare a side. The same is also true for the linebacker, and it also gives the playside guard time to work up to him as well. And then on the backside, we also see the guard have time to get into position to wall off the corner. Now, because the nose tackle already had control of the center early in the rep, he's able to shed and fall back into the gap. But because Wright forced him to declare to the front side A gap, and because he closed space as he pressed his landmark, he's only able to get an arm in front of Wright as opposed to his entire body. Wright is able to gain about 3 to 4 yards before the nose tackle is able to really clamp down. But with some help of the Tennessee center, he loses his grip and Wright is able to power through for a 10-yard gain. Jaylen is no stranger to gap scheme runs as well, where he again displays good tempo to let his blocks develop, while also using his gravity to widen defenders and find seams. Here we see him do just that as he patiently presses outside to force the linebacker to widen and help give the pulling tackle a better angle to make the block. He hugs the lineman as he cuts upfield, and this gives him enough space to find a seam to get an ugly 4 yards. Not every play is going to be a home run. Wright shows the ability to set up his blocks so that he can minimize negative plays and keep the offense on schedule with steady gains. When things break down, he can improvise with quick feet and efficient jump cuts to probe for openings. Jaylen really shines when he gets to the second and third level of the defense. Like I mentioned already, his burst allows him to run by defenders trying to close on the second level. Pay attention to the linebackers and safeties and how often they have to change their initial direction in their pursuit. When he has to beat a third level safety, whether that's a post safety in cover 3 or a safety playing quarters, he tends to beat them by running at them or jabbing at them to get them to stop their feet so that he can accelerate by them. He's not the most dynamic runner in the sense that he's not trying to break someone's ankles. Rather, he's trying to give himself a sliver of space so that he can use his acceleration to beat a defender. Because of this, he's not downshifting as he approaches a third level defender. He's trying to carry as much speed as possible as he makes his move. As a result, when he's in open space, defenders are usually forced into diving sweep tackles to try to trip him up. Wright is well prepared for this, as he utilizes a lot of hip shifts, high knees, and hops to pick his feet up and avoid those tackles. In addition to that, because he's moving at a high rate of speed, he runs through arm tackles from defenders that are caught behind him. And because he consistently beats angles, if they do grab him, he's often dragging them for an extra 5+ yards. Out of 160 qualifying running backs in the Power 5 conferences, Wright was second in explosive rush rate, which PFF classifies as runs of 10 or more yards. He's also second in yards per carry. Now, having said that, Wright isn't a finished product or a complete back as a runner. He does a great job to press holes and set up his blocks, but there are times where he will press a little too far and get indecisive and then run into his blockers. It doesn't happen that often, but it is something for him to get better at. Also, like with most young running backs that have been faster than pretty much everyone in their life, there's times where he will look to bounce runs outside if an obvious hole hasn't presented itself. It's worked for him a lot, but at the next level, where the athletic gap will be reduced, he'll need to be more cognizant of times where he can try to stretch things outside or work to get the 2 to 3 yards that are available. This play here is a good example. The Volunteers are running a gap scheme run designed to hit to the left, where there's already an extra defender in the box. Tennessee has reduced the split of the receiver to be able to block this safety, but if the corner executes a proper crack replace, he should still be in position to out-leverage the run and force it back inside. The receiver misses his block, so it doesn't matter, and Wright tries to take the run outside anyway, but on this play, he can't outrace the defender. We see Wright open his hips to run outside pretty quickly instead of remaining patient and pressing outside to open up a seam inside like we saw earlier. Wright needs to be aware that the defense has a numbers advantage and that there's likely to be an unblocked defender, and work with his blockers to help create an opening inside. He probably wasn't getting a ton of yards either way, but he's taking a much bigger risk by bubbling backwards 2 yards. His penchant to outrun defenders shows up in the open field as well. He'll often bounce outside, have an opportunity to get vertical again, and then decide to continue running outside to defenders that have him out-leveraged. There's also several reps on film where he will run himself out of bounds as he tries to win a foot race to the edge. Although he plays with a good tempo as he presses the line of scrimmage, once he shifts to 5th gear, he rarely shifts back down. If he were to change his pace just a bit with some hesitations or jab steps, he can force the defender to slow their momentum so that he has a better angle to re-accelerate around the corner. And if they don't match his tempo, then he can be in a better position to cut back. But it's hard to use any significant change of direction moves when running at top speed. He's also not the most physical runner or one looking to finish off runs with a lot of physicality. He runs with a high pad level throughout all parts of the field, whether that's through the line of scrimmage or at the 2nd and 3rd level, and he's more content to run out of bounds instead of lowering his shoulder to run through defenders. Some coaches prefer to have their backs save some hits, while others want their backs to set the tone and be the hammer. And maybe Tennessee wanted him to run out of bounds in those situations, but that's something that would have to be asked of him during the combine. When he does lower his shoulder, he's often looking to spin off contact instead of running behind his pads. There are some impressive reps of him displaying contact balance as he spins off of tackles, but when running inside, I'd like to see more forward lean and leg drive to get that extra yardage. He was 5th in the Power 5 in yards after contact, so if you just read the stats and don't watch the film, you would think he's also a power runner. But those yards are often the result of Wright putting defenders in a bad position with his burst and running through arm tackles of trailing defenders. When he gets a full head of steam, he'll run over guys on occasion, but he's not someone that's going to run through guys in confined spaces or short yardage situations very often. That's just not his style. He's also a little high cut, and while there's plenty of backs that have been successful with that body type, it's something he'll need to be aware of. Tall backs and backs with longer legs have a tendency to step too far outside of their frame at times. This can cause a loss of power on cuts and just a general loss of balance. There were a few reps of that happening on his tape. As a receiver, it's hard to formulate a full opinion just based on his college tape. Due to the nature of Tennessee's offense, they don't throw to backs a lot. Tennessee was 1st in the Power 5 in RPO rate in 2023. He has very limited tape to go off, especially compared to some of the top backs from last year's class. Jaylen Wright had 25 targets this past season, and while that ranked 41st in the Power 5, that is the most targets for a volunteer running back in any season since Josh Heupel became head coach in 2021. His route tree was not very diverse, as he was utilized mainly on swing routes from the backfield and flanker and slot screens when aligned out wide, with a few checkdowns scattered in between. There were a few impressive reps of him catching passes outside of his frame with a good ability to gather and pierce upfield quickly. However, like we see in the run game, he's content to try to outrace guys to the edge and often ends up running himself out of bounds. His missed tackle rate on receptions in his final year of college was very low compared to the final year from the top 3 backs in last year's class. As a blocker, he is willing and physical, and he does a good job understanding his assignment. He quickly steps up to create space from the quarterback and generally plays with his hands and uses his eyes to see what he's hitting. He will need to work on his technique though, as he was often beat by speed rushes. He had some bad whiffs as he would lunge into contact. He also needs to improve his ability to mirror with his feet after the initial contact. But the most important thing to see for a young guy is his willingness to block, because the rest can be drilled and developed. He will be 21 for the entirety of his rookie season, so he still has a lot of experience to gain and room to grow. He also has very low tread on his tires when compared to some of the top guys, as he only had 403 total touches in college. Jaylen had just 3 career games with over 20 carries, so there may be some questions if he is able to handle a heavy workload. I'll be interested to see how he measures at the combine. Tennessee lists him at 5'11 and 210 pounds. I wouldn't be surprised if he was closer to 205, but either way, his BMI would be on the lower edge of the desired threshold for a lead back. I think where he would really excel is in a scheme that utilizes a lot of outside zone runs, where his long speed to threaten the edge will stretch defenses horizontally that will in turn create vertical seams for him to show off his burst. The Chargers were 21st in percentage of runs that were outside zone in Kellen Moore's lone season there, but over his 4 seasons in Dallas, they ranked 12th. With an Eagles offense that already has top weapons to create explosive plays through the air, Wright would be a great addition to add some juice to the running game. We saw how Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, and Keaton Mitchell helped to transform their team's respective offenses this past season. Jaylen Wright has the skill set to do the same for the Eagles.